Yeah.
Welcome to the Midcoast Community Council meeting of August 9th, 2017. Will the council members introduce yourselves?
Chris Johnson.
Dan Haggerty.
Claire Touton.
Lisa Ketchum.
Braden Kwan.
Dave Olson.
And the first item on our agenda is the Board of Supervisors report, which there is none. Are there any government officials, others that wish to report? Harvey Rarbach from Half Moon Bay City Council.
Pleasure to be here tonight. I have a couple of items which I think are of interest to Midcoast. Start with the elephant in the room. Everybody's talking about Half Moon Bay's reaction to what's going on with the intertie pipe system at SAM. I can assure you that everybody on the city council is very much in favor of public health. We're very much in favor of making sure that the IPS repair happens. And stay tuned, within the near future, you're going to see that demonstrated in a very concrete way. So I understand that there's a lot of misapprehension about what's going on, but be assured that the city council wants the IPS repaired as much as people on the Midcoast do. Speaking of city council actions, at the next city council meeting on the 15th, I am reasonably sure that we're going to be talking about cannabis and what the city needs to do to implement any ordinances and any policies related to cannabis. What we have to do with greenhouses, cultivation. So there's a lot going on there, and I imagine that is of interest to you folks too. So you're welcome to come on the 15th, the next city council meeting. Then there's three related items that have to do with commissions and committees that the city council has set up. They're all somewhat related. One is the Parks and Trail Master Plan. We're considering what we need to do to improve our park situation. That certainly affects people on the Mid-Coast who use our parks, and we want to expand what we offer and make them more available to everybody. So that's one committee. The other committee that's relevant is our Bike and Pedestrian Committee, and they're pushing ahead to make sure that the East Side Trail on Highway 1 actually comes about. So that's important to everybody on the coast side, and we are trying to encourage as much bike and pedestrian use and ability to get from neighborhood to neighborhood as possible. And lastly, related to these two other committees, the Planning Commission is working very hard on our local coastal program update. And they met yesterday, and you're welcome to watch the a video of what was talked about. But the whole idea of coastal access, of making sure that we do encourage a what they're calling a town, what's the word?
Town Boulevard.
What? Oh yeah, Town Boulevard. That Highway 1 will be a town boulevard through Half Moon Bay. And we're going to slow traffic down, try to make it...
How could it get slower?
I'm not supposed to interact with the...
Keep going.
You keep going, okay. All right, I'll be glad to answer any questions from anybody, even Catherine. Another item that I'm sure is of interest is airline noise. There was a lot of representation from Midcoast people at our last city council meeting, and in response to that, the Federal Aviation Administration was very scared to hear what Midcoast people had to say, so they've issued a response to Congresswoman Spears' request for a lot of, over 100 recommendations, and they've responded to some of them. So the FAA report is out now. It's an interim report, and in the fall, maybe next month, there will be a complete response to all the suggestions, including the important one that affects us all, which is to move the waypoint for the airlines, which right now go right over El Granada and Half Moon Bay, to move that further out over the ocean and maybe make it higher. That would make a big difference to people in dealing with airline noise that affects many people here. Pacifica, Brisbane, they were all complaining about how bad airline noise is. So there's going to be a technical working group that's part of the SFO Roundtable organization, where people can listen to and make public comments about the FAA report. And that technical working group is going to meet at the airport in the meeting room that's designed for this sort of thing on August 15th, the same day as the city council meeting. So I won't be able to be there because I have to see the city manager for my weekly report. But from 1 to 4 p.m., if you're interested, I can tell you exactly where it is. And the more people that come and hear about the response from the FAA and what the roundtable wants to send back to the FAA, that would be very useful.
Harvey, that's at SFO.
Yep,
Can he email you for more information?
sure. And the last item on my list has to do with the eclipse of the sun on the 21st from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And we're encouraging everyone to reduce their use of electricity if it's at all possible, if you can put off things, because that will reduce the load that otherwise we would have to make up with fossil fuels during the time the sun is not shining completely. Okay? That's the end of my report.
Wait a minute. I just want to add something to what Harvey said about the SFO noise. The MCC is going to have agenda item on September 13th on San Francisco Airport aircraft noise, and there will be a presentation by the SFO Noise Abatement Office, and Supervisor Pine, who represents the unincorporated area, will on the roundtable committee. He'll also come. Just wanted to add that. So, questions from the council? Dan, I think you had your hand up before.
Yeah, on the pedestrian, the bike access,
Yeah.
Did you say there's a committee that's,
There's a bike and ped committee
okay?
that has met a few times and reports back to,
And who's leading that?
who's leading that?
Yeah.
Who's on that? I know Paulette Eisen is on it.
You could email me.
Michelle Dragony is on it. I can get you the other
Okay.
people.
And with all the discussion about more use of the trails with pedestrians and bicycles, like you
Yeah,
wisely suggested, they should be used more,
yep,
right?
yep.
Has there been any discussion about, or suggestions about looking into potential under-road pedestrian bike crossings? To further safety and to further reduce the load, the backup, which Catherine's left the room, but has.
No, she
Oh,
has,
there you are,
she's here,
sorry.
she's still here.
Has noted that, it is pretty bad.
The question of crossing Highway 1 has only come up in regard to,
Pedestrian undercrossings?
no, but crossings in general.
Okay.
We need to improve them, that's for sure. The only thing that we've been talking about up to now is crosswalks. Marked crosswalks, whether they're lit or not is one issue, whether it's flashing. There's a lot of questions about that, but I have not heard about any practical requests to go underground. And I understand that you think it's important and it definitely would improve safety, but it's just not been under discussion up to now. But we have worried about crossing Highway 1 safety and trying to figure out how to do that.
And as a city council member, Half Moon Bay, you'd be open to hearing more of the benefits of that.
Yep.
Excellent.
Claire?
Just another word on your east side trail. As I understand it, there's a gap between what's conceived of for that trail and.
It's on
and
the
the
capital
parallel.
improvement budget that was passed
Oh, it was,
last
I'm
month.
sorry, not up to date.
Say that again?
There was a gap between the two trails, your trail and the parallel trail. Apparently, Dave says that's been fixed.
Well, no, it's not fixed, but it's on the capital improvement.
Right.
List.
We would like to go all the way up to the northern city border. And that's going, we're looking for grants to be able to finish that off, but that's definitely on the agenda to complete.
You guys have questions for Harvey? Anybody in the public have questions for Harvey? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I wrote this. Well, next item, as Chair of Sam. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Slater Carter. I am the Chair of Sewer Authority Midcoast Side and also a member of the Montero Water and Sanitary District Board. But right now I have my Sam hat on. My Montero hat may come later. I am very, very worried about Sam. Essentially, we're going to be out of money on August 18th. The normal process when a member agency of a joint powers authority has a problem with the budget is they pass the budget and then under protest and then they sue so that the joint powers agency can continue to function. At this point, Sam has to be making decisions about which vendors it can pay because we are running out of money. Montero has agreed to send the funds from the 17-18 budget to Sam, but we're only 20% of the budget. Granada has also passed the budget, but they are only 30% of the budget. If you want to see what's going on, keep in mind that actions speak louder than words. And so for the August 7th SAM meeting, which was on Monday evening, watch the excellent Pacifica TV broadcast. And it's only about 45 minutes long because we have to end the meeting at 9 p.m. and we have closed session first. So the open session was only about 45 minutes. It's pretty quick. And you will see that Half Moon Bay, yet again, refused to adopt the budget with us, with Montero and Granada. And on the subsequent agenda item, refused to increase the contract for the attorney to Sam so that Sam could defend itself as a party of interest. And so I look forward to what Half Moon Bay has to offer. I very much look forward to it because at this point, Sam is facing somewhere between $7.5 and $9 million worth of fines for the pipeline spills that happened earlier in the year. And we have multi-million dollars worth of repairs that have to happen. And we have had the Regional Water Quality Control Board visiting Sam twice to talk about the spills and do its investigation. And they're coming back again to not only investigate Sam, but the 3-member agencies, showing this kind of these arguments, this court case in front of regulatory agencies is putting the entire coast side health and safety and finances at risk. And I am very, very, very worried about this whole thing. As the chair of SAM, my concern is making sure SAM has the funding to do this. Like I say, Montera has agreed, Grenada has agreed, Half Moon Bay has to date not agreed. So please watch the meeting, and our next meeting will be next Monday at the Sewer Authority Midcoast site in Half Moon Bay. You go down to Half Moon Bay, get off. If you're coming from the Midcoast, get off, take a right onto Kehoe, take a left under the frontage, and then take another right onto the Bev Cunha Road. And please come. It will be televised. We will be talking about the budget again. And please let us know what you think about it, because this is a very, very serious issue. And thank you for your time and allowing me to speak. Are there any questions? Yes, Claire.
What time is the meeting?
It starts at 7.
What's the date on
That is 14th. And we may have closed session before that. We generally, because the SAM has a resolution where we have to end our meetings at 9, we have to have closed session first. But there's not a lot of seats, so come early for cookies and to get a seat. But we'd love to have people come. Bev Cunha Road. It's you get off at Kehoe, you take a right on Kehoe, take a left on the frontage road, take a right on Bev Cunha Road, and just go to the end.
Put it in your GPS.
Yeah, it shows up on your GPS, but it's real easy to go to. If this is not resolved and we have to have another special meeting, as chair, I will call the special meeting and hold it either in Montera or El Granada, even though Half Moon Bay will not show up for meetings in Montera or El Granada. They didn't when we had a special meeting here. As chair, it's my belief, and I put my beliefs into action, that the whole coast side should be included in our meetings. And so I want to be able to have special meetings here. Our resolution says regular meetings will be in Half Moon Bay at SAM Board, but special meetings under the Brown Act can be held anywhere within the district. Claire?
Do you want to describe the roots of the impasse, or should we just let that go for now?
I'd be happy. There is a document called the Joint Powers Authority, and it's on the samcleanswater.org website. It's an old document. It's very readable, and Half Moon Bay has a different take on it than Grenada, Montera do, and also than SAM has. And so Half Moon Bay made the decision that it would not pay this year's budget until a judge could settle it. Gail?
Can service be cut off?
No. No. We need to keep the sewer plant. No. They don't even have any holding tanks like we do in Montera and Grenada. So they have some problems. But no, neither Montera nor Grenada would do that because it is a matter of public health and safety. Chris?
I mean, hopefully, obviously, it won't go there, but okay, so let's just say you can't get resolution at the next meeting. Like, what's the end game here? Does the county or LAFCO or somebody step in and take control of this entity? What happens when we don't have the money? The reason I asked this, Catherine, is because we had a presentation from Sam like a month or two ago that was
Beverly, yeah.
very revealing to me. Like, I didn't know that much about it. And I don't think that many people on the entire coast side really follow Sam or know what's going on. And so we see it in the paper, we see it on Nextdoor, but it's usually like, you know, he said, she said. It's hard to understand where the problems lie. And I just think that, myself included, people on the coast side are not really that worried about it because they don't know like what, when that shoe falls, what's gonna happen.
I've been on Montero Water and Sanitary for a very long time. And it's my experience that if your plumbing works, you're happy, both coming in and out. And that's the way it should be. As chair, I have encouraged, and also under our strategic plan, we encouraged Beverly to come out to other agencies and talk about SAM, because SAM is, and the SAM crew are, in my humble opinion, the most important environmental workers we have on the coast. Without our sewer system, you can imagine what things would be. And a thing that Montero and Granada can be very, very proud of is there's some tanks under the ground out here. You can see the land in green that Granada bought so that we could have wet weather overflow tanks. Half Moon Bay did not participate in building those tanks, even though it protects, those tanks protect their
Catherine?
their beaches.
This isn't an agenda
I'm
item, so
sorry.
you just try and stay focused.
I'm sorry.
and,
So that's, the end game is to get SAM functioning and funded. To
But-
keep SAM functioning and funded. And I'm sure that this will come around. I'm sure that negotiations can happen, and there are also court actions that can be taken. So we're not done yet.
Are we accruing, you've mentioned 7 to 9 million fines, every day or every week that this goes on? Are there more fines
No.
accruing, more penalties, so?
No, we're at the point of negotiating and talking to Regional Water Quality Control Board and seeing what happens. This is very early in the game on that. We'll find out what happens. They're simply doing their inspections and fact-finding right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyway, I invite everybody to come on Monday the 14th and watch Monday the 7th on the Pacifica TV. Pacifica TV is an important part of what goes on, and this is why we have it, so people can stay up to date. And thank you for your time.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone, a member of the public who wants to speak on an item that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we go on to consent. We have the minutes for July 26th.
I will move we approve the consent agenda.
All in favor?
Aye.
6-0.
I second it.
Thank you. Regular agenda. First up, county subdivision regulations update. Joe Leclerc, Planning Services Manager, is that it?
Yes, thank you very much, council members and Chair Lisa Ketchum. I'm here tonight to bring you up to date on our progress in updating the subdivision regulations. And I want to shout out to my colleague, David Petrovich here, who is the principal author of this work. He's been at it with us for a year and a half, and it's been a tremendous research effort, and as well as lots of meetings with experts and county council to hammer out the draft that we mailed to you. So we sent via email a staff report and a copy of the revised ordinance that includes all the new and changed provisions, as well as some graphics that show a new process that we want to implement as part of the project. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I was a little hasty there. So tonight, what we want to talk about is what the project entails, our process of progress, the date, the previous comments that we heard at the Midcoast Council. So we were here last spring, not this past spring, but the spring before that, to get comments at the beginning of the project to say, okay, we're updating, what are some of the concerns that you have. So we want to go over those and share this development footprint analysis that I just mentioned, that's depicted in the attached graphics, and talk about next steps and take comments and questions. And I want to say that we are in the middle of an outreach effort that started last night with the Pescadero Municipal Advisory Council, and will conclude at the North Fair Oaks Community Council in the 24th of August. But what we're trying to do with this effort is recognize that the subdivision regulations are this large, complex document that pretty esoteric. It's really driven by the State Map Act and court cases that have been decided over the decades, and we wanted to give people an opportunity to understand it. So we see these as sort of a explaining and introduction meetings. We're going to have a workshop that I'll talk about later with the Planning Commission prior to starting the formal amendment process of working with the board and the Planning Commission. So just want to clarify that we're not expecting you to have read it and have all your comments tonight. We want to see this as kind of, like I said, an introduction, preliminary comments with opportunities in the future for more comments, recognizing the depth and breadth of the document. Thanks, Steve. So what is the subdivision regulations do? Well, they're the process by which the county authorizes the creation of new lots for sale and development. And they also make provision for the infrastructure that's necessary for development. Now, most of the subdivisions that occur in the county are small, and they don't involve large new streets or lots of streets, so we don't see a lot of that kind of public improvement taking place. But nonetheless, the subdivision process is when those kinds of commitments are made, what kind of access and utility service are going to be provided and necessary, and who's going to pay for it to ensure that development proceeds in an orderly fashion. So the subdivision process is how we go about that, and it is a way of implementing the general plan and the zoning. So the policies that establish the intensity of development are in the general plan and zoning, and the subdivision ordinance is a process by which that can be actualized in the case where it involves dividing property and or making public improvements. So we last updated the ordinance in 1992, so it's been a quarter century, and there have been considerable amendments to the MAP Act during that time period, so we need to incorporate those as well. There have been a number of issues, some of which you raised at the meeting that we came to in April of last year that need to be addressed, and so the proposed revisions modify existing terminology and clarify the definitions and add some new provisions. We also create a process for determining the amount of development that's appropriate on a site based on hazards and natural resources, and also added some new types of subdivisions to deal with some of the more vertical development that we may be seeing on the bay side. And then just wanted to make clear that no land use policies are changed as a result of these amendments. So this is simply, as I described, the process of sort of actualizing general plan and zoning policies, but we're not changing any of those. Next slide, please. So where have we been? As I mentioned, we started this project about 1.5 years ago. And then we did a lot of research, initial outreach, meeting with experts, and did some internal stakeholder consultation with our internal departments. We came out and met with the councils. We sent out letters and other outreach to homeowner associations and other organizations that might have interest in the amendments, and took all of that information in, and then we also started doing our research on what were the changes in the MAP Act and which ones should we incorporate into the ordinance. All of this, of course, with the advice of council. We had at the At the conclusion of our outreach, we had a meeting before the Planning Commission last spring, not this past spring, but the spring before, to get their feedback so that we had their direction in sort of framing the project before we really got started. So it took us a year after that to really distill, do the research and draft the ordinance and revise it and draft it again. And so here we are now with a draft revision that we want your comments on, and we will be, doing that over a period. And so that's why we're here tonight. Thanks. Next slide. So what did we hear from you last time? And we heard things like, lot coverage should not include hazardous or underwater areas. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later when we get into the development footprint process. And that location of these hazards should be on subdivision maps. And so this, development footprint approach, I think will address this comment. Certificates of compliance, that's what CFC stands for. Type B in the coastal zone should limit development for LCP consistency. And so processing of conditional CFCs is currently being done in compliance with LCP policies. And we do issue coastal development permits as required for any CFCs that are in the coastal zone, and they are analyzed pursuant to the policies that apply in the LCP. Creation of new flag lots should be avoided. The zoning ordinances currently allow for flag lots. They make provision for, those narrow width flag poles that gain access to the back. Sometimes these are the only way that a site that can accommodate 2 homes can be developed. It may not have all the frontage that's needed, but it's got plenty of depth. And for, we are, as I said, we're not proposing any changes to the zoning policies as part of this project. Shared wells should not be allowed. And this is really a question both of capacity and and health. And so we tend to defer to our colleagues in the Department of Health with regard to, the adequacy of wells. But it's, again, a land use intensity policy that is not the focus of this update effort. And then there was a question about approving that we shouldn't approve any new subdivisions until lot retirement is in place, and then the lot retirement should only be on a lot-for-lot basis, and that the mandatory lot merger program should begin. And the LCP already assumes a reduction of buildable lots through a program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later when I get to the part about the Connect the Coast side, the next agenda item. But I just want to mention that we are intending to initiate the lot merger program this year as we are wrapping up the subdivision ordinance. And I can talk more about the lot retirement program when I get to Connect the Coast side, if that's okay. So next slide, please. So the MAP Act changes that we're making to comply with the MAP Act address things like policies controlling the preparation and review of subdivision maps, extending expiration dates for approved maps. So this was provisions mainly in response to the economic downturn of 10 years that started 10 years ago, but these provisions are useful going forward for, let's say we have another downturn, somebody spends a lot of money getting a subdivision approved, then that they can have an extension because, let's say they aren't able to get financing for several years. The enhanced safeguards for tenants to purchase units converted to condos and/or mobile home parks. So the idea is to clarify the provisions by which those people who live in a apartment building or who live in a mobile home park can purchase the land and/or units for themselves as sort of a co-op. And then Also clarifying the lot merger provisions, and also additional improvements that may be required with a map. So we wanted to make sure that our provisions for exactions when a subdivision goes through, as I mentioned, the easy stuff is streets and sewers and sidewalks and that sort of thing. But there's also things like coastal access and other schools and parks, and we wanted to make sure that all those provisions were up to date and consistent with state law. And of course, there were another of other minor amendments that were simple text amendments to address changes in state law, not fundamental things, but they're all outlined in the staff, or in the ordinance draft. And I want to mention too that if you do look at it online or print out a copy, we distinguished between those amendments that were State Map Act amendments and those that were staff generated, so that you can understand. We felt that, you know, to a large extent, the Map Act dictates what can happen in the realm of subdivision, although we do have some discretion about how we approach it here in San Mateo County, and we wanted to make sure it was clear those policy changes that were Map Act driven and those that are staff initiated, and those are ones over which the board has considerable discretion whether to adopt, and the public has a lot of say in what form those take. So staff proposed changes include clarifying existing definitions and terms, aligning with zoning terminology where necessary. We want to make sure that our ordinances are not in conflict with one another, reconcile outdated text with current application and review practices, and also streamline the certificate of compliance process. So so part of that, what we did was to specify the criteria for legalizing parcels unique to circumstances of the parcel. But basically what we did is we wanted to clarify that what are the exceptions? In other words, what are the conditions under which you do not need a certificate of compliance? Then to clarify the provisions for type A, which are the ministerial certificates of compliance, and also to create a pathway for certificates of compliance type B, where there's no conditions imposed because they will be imposed at development. So if you're just looking at one lot where they're not going to be building a street or adding a sewer line or some other kind of public improvement, and there are consequently no conditions to bring the lot into compliance with the general plan or zoning ordinance. And what was the other criteria? It was the consistency with the general plan, and but anyway, they were not going to require a public hearing for those. Then those could go on a faster track than. Now this doesn't apply in the coast side because all the CFC type Bs on the coast side have to get a coastal development permit, so they have to go to a public hearing. But this is for streamlining Bayside outside of coastal zone CFCs. And then so we clarified the sort of process language for how those are handled, and I think that we believe that although we added a lot of language to the ordinance, it will result in a clarification of the process so that folks can matriculate through it more quickly. So the other thing that we've added is this idea of a development footprint, which the intention is to create a process at the front end of the subdivision application process where the applicant conducts a site analysis in advance of preparing a tentative map that puts everybody on notice as to what the natural resources are that are present on the site, the hazards that are present on the site, and how those existing physical features, and including trees, wildlife habitat, wetlands, cultural resources. There's a host of things that can limit where development can occur. that we want to map those in advance, and then establish non-development areas around those, kind of come to agreement about what those are before we get a application for a tentative map, and then see that analysis reflected in the application. So this is, and we'll walk through some examples of this in a moment. And so, as a matter of fact, we'll do it right now. So, two examples that we've prepared for you is this Bayside Creek, and the other is coastal bluff erosion. So, if we could get the next slide, please. So, with each of these, we have prepared a kind of I want to mention that these are cartoons. These are not real places. These are just intended to be emblematic of the kinds of the process and how one works through it, and try to make it as real as possible. So in this instance, you got a vacant urban infill site that has, you know, extensive street frontage and off-site access to all utilities, and it's bisected by a stream that has some natural resources associated with it. Next slide, please. And so here's a existing conditions map that'll be part of the required application materials, and it shows in the legend, you can see, you know, our legend shows the park that was on the prior slide up to the north. That's not on this site, but you can see that there's a creek buffer identified, and so on the coast side, those would be the LCP legislated creek buffers. Existing protected trees, heritage and significant trees, a willow salsal, and another willow stand, and a wetland. So those are the, you know, existing conditions that are need to be considered in identifying non-development areas. Next slide, please. So what we've done then is shown that this would be the, let's say, the applicant's proposal or the negotiated outcome of a back and forth between staff and the applicant over where non-development areas on the site will be. Next slide, please. And this is a layout of a subdivision that, and this is not, you know, designed by an engineer. This is staff just sort of kind of loosely describing what might happen, but it shows you the portions of lots that, like number 18 in the lower left there is a large lot, but, you know, a significant portion of it on the corner there is undevelopable. Similar with 22 and 21 and so on. So the idea is that, you know, we have a private street that comes in and provides access to these lots that are central to the thing. And you've got some oddly shaped lots at the back, but the idea is that you create large enough lots that can be developed on, but lay out areas where no development can occur, and that way we can protect the resources that people are concerned about. So next slide, please. The other example that we want to share with you tonight is a coast side example where the issue is coastal bluff erosion. And so setting a vacant urban infill site, bluff edge along the seacoast, moderate some street frontage, and off-site access to all utilities. Next slide, please. The existing conditions show that there's a number of protected trees along the First Avenue there. It shows that there is a planned coastal trail along the bluff. And also there's two lines there, a red line and a blue line. The red line shows the projected 50-year erosion rate, and the blue line shows the projected 100-year erosion rate. And we're looking at this as part of the reason we want to look at it in the longer term is because it's a residential use, zoned residentially, and we recognize that residential tends to persist, and so we want to have a longer view. And so, next slide, please. So this identifies the non-development area, which includes the trees and and I have a feeling that there might be a mistake in this, but anyway, what we've done here is we've shown basically a non-development area along the coastside that saves room for the trail to migrate inland as erosion occurs, so that at the 100-year line, you still have room for the trail upland of the, recognizing that we have uncertainty about the pace of erosion and what form it's going to take. We still want to try to plan ahead for those kinds of, so that coastal access that would be required of this subdivision persists. Next slide, please. So here's the building footprints and the hazard avoidance area, and it's also a coastal access area. It's kind of a mixed easement. And then the mistake I think that we made here is that we failed to account for a couple of tree removals that are allowed. So the sort of the codified non-development area becomes these resource protection areas. So some of the trees that were shown on the slide just before are removed in order to provide driveways to these homes, but basically what this does is it sets aside those tree areas and through map conditions as protected areas for trees into the future. So those are two examples of this process that we have proposed and would be required of basically all subdivisions that come to the county that have resources or hazards on the site, whether they're cultural or natural resources. So our next steps for this project are to wrap up our presentations with the councils. We're going to the Agricultural Commission next week and North Fair Oaks Council at the end of the month, and then we intend to have a October workshop, probably the first meeting in October with the Planning Commission to get their feedback on this and the public's feedback. So we encourage you to review our work and provide your comments. And then we hope to start the formal process in November and have a formal public hearing before the Planning Commission then, and then another hearing before the board in January of 2018, and transmit the revised ordinance or regulations, to the Coastal Commission, assuming we get board approval in January. We do that in February. And I think that is all we have for you this evening on subdivision, and happy to hear your comments and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. First, clarifying questions from the council. Anybody?
Yeah, I have a clarifying question. So the fictitious plan you put up there, First Avenue?
Yes.
First Avenue? Can you give me a couple examples of where that might apply?
No, I don't have any specific sites. Is that what you mean? No. This is simply, hypothetical examples to show how these issues could play out on a site. And we did a GIS analysis throughout the county to identify the potential for subdivision in all the unincorporated areas of the county. And basically it was very simple. What we did is we asked the computer, show me lots that are bigger than the minimum lot size in the zoning, and then show me those lots and grade them based on 2 to 4, 4 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50 lots that might be possible based on the current zoning on each of those parcels. It ignored a whole lot of things, including ability to do septic, whether there's access, all the typical kinds of constraints that might arise. And so we identified a lot of potential for subdivision, but it's not realistic because it wasn't based on all those constraints, and there's really no way that we could impose those on a countywide basis. And so we don't really have an ability to say, oh yeah, this site for sure could subdivide. And we purposefully chose not to pick specific sites because we didn't want to prejudice decisions about, applications that might come before the board.
Thank you.
A couple of questions. On page 3.4, where they're talking about lots shall meet the following design criteria, and what is the definition of single-family attached residential, which is supposedly exempt from the 5,000 square foot minimum? Single-family attached residential.
That is townhouses or condominiums. So you can't meet 5,000. It's kind of how do you say? It's actually not written for, it should be multifamily, because you can't have single family attached by definition. Once they're attached, they're multifamily. So, you have duplex is the next level up from single family, and then the triplex, and then on into, but they're all multifamily structures. So we actually, it should say multifamily, because,
That would help, because when I read it, I thought maybe it's talking about second unit or something.
Yeah, no, it was a mistake.
Okay, thanks. And the lot coverage question that it wasn't a question, it went on our initial letter, we had spoke about that the when you determine the square footage you can have in the house, it shouldn't depend on the area of the lot that's underwater or in thin air. We have this project that's currently going through the process where it's kind of surreal, because they talk about, the setback from the creek and the setback from the lot line, and we're all good, but the lot line's out in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue here is the edge of this valley. It's a cliff that's eroding. And so just, as the lot shrinks because of these areas, there's really no there, then so I understand the policy is not part of this thing, but where do we go to ask for that? You know what I mean?
Well, I think it is a different policy effort that would need to be, it would probably be a good idea to bring it up during the process of considering these amendments, because it would need to be a follow-on zoning change that was, and study, because I think, one of the things that we would need to do is to be able to characterize areas where these types of conditions arise, determine whether it's widespread and it's possible to make a general policy, or whether it needs to be specific to geographic areas. It's not a small undertaking to develop something like that, and so that's part of the reason why we narrowed this to just the subdivision ordinance. It was quite a bit of work just to get to this point with this, so I think that it certainly could be a policy effort that could follow on.
So it's always a quandary of who to ask and when to ask for it, you know what I mean? So I guess that's the advice I'm asking you for. So we should bring it up, even with this process, we should keep mentioning it?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah, I think you
Okay.
should. And,
All right.
it's, the board and the planning commission, have a number of policy priorities they want us to be working on, and
Okay.
there's always room on the list for more.
Okay.
And certainly things like the slide that's up right now are very much along those lines, so it's appropriate to mention, and we'd like to see that carried over to single lot development as well.
I would assume that if part of the lot is underwater or something, that would be an identified hazard.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
apparently it doesn't affect the FA, what is it, the, square
Allowable
footage
floor
allowed.
area.
Not today, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was asking
Mhm.
about. So I want to open public
I
comment.
think Chris had something he wanted to
Yes.
clarify too.
I did have one was on that, so the reason why, per Midcoast Community Council's comments from the last time, the first comment about lot coverage calculation should not include hazards, and I think this was Lisa's question, my question was, the response was, the proposed amendments do not exclude resource protection or hazard avoidance areas of lots from the determination of allowable floor area, and my question was, why not, and the reason is because that's not within the scope of this project. Okay.
Yes, it would be a change in zoning.
Okay, although I do think that that definitely needs to be a priority, because without that change, I mean, you're still looking at then technically this whole lot, when we had an example in Moss Beach where half of the lot is a fault zone, and so the people still wanted to build, so they build their same size house, but now it's crammed into the other half of the lot. And they got a 3-story house right on the property line with an exemption, so, setback exemption, so.
Yeah, well, let me just say that, because the subdivision process is a public process, and by front-loading these issues into the subdivision process, it may be easier to address some of the, at least even under just these policies. I mean, once the lots are created, they're created. And so we're all dealing with legacy property rights and takings issues and a host of considerations. And so I think that when it comes to creating new lots going forward, we have discretion to factor in those kinds of considerations today based on this policy approach that we wouldn't have had without doing this, kind of making it public as to what the constraints are, and then maybe making the lots that have these constraints larger so that it doesn't feel like the home is, as you characterized it, sort of shoehorned into the remnant piece.
So Lisa, I have one follow-on clarification. So explicitly, to ask a little bit further depth question on this example right here, which is not real, the lots are shown as extending into the HAA. So on this particular subdivision map, the square footage of the lot, and therefore the lot coverage ratios, would include those areas that are in the hazard zone. Is that correct on this particular map?
Under current zoning, yes, that's
Okay.
true.
Okay, that was just.
Yeah,
what I
we
wanted to
haven't,
clarify.
yeah, we haven't proposed,
So, in other words, because you could propose that they draw the lots to not include the HAA, and therefore that would be a common area, but not part of the lot.
that's a possibility, yeah. I mean, and we didn't want to presuppose a number of the outcomes here. It was really more, because in the course of, the negotiations over a particular subdivision, it could be that a common area is set aside and not part of possible development.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Chris?
Going back to MCC comments and responses, item J was traffic mitigation fees should include calculation of impact costs over the life of the subdivision. County responded, county has not adopted traffic mitigation fees. However, for large subdivisions, the county requires mitigation measures that address quantified traffic impacts. And I guess my question for you is, what does quantified traffic impacts mean? Does that mean over the life of the subdivision, or just for construction and planning
Well,
of
in
the mitigation?
In the case of say, the big wave project, it was some number of decades out that, they looked at the impacts of the project today, or, at opening and on into the future. But the CEQA limits the way that the county looks at, traffic impacts, and those things are changing as well with the advent of the vehicle miles traveled as another mechanism for, we have not used it, and quite frankly don't know how to at this point, but we still operate under the levels of service standards of significance in CEQA documents, CEQA analyses that we prepare. And we look at the impact of the project, and the project is kind of a finite thing, and its impact doesn't necessarily increase over time unless there's a build-out component to it, as there is in the case of Big Wave. So when we look at the mitigation requirements of a project based on its impacts, generally speaking, we come to a finite determination as to what those are. There's, at build-out, it will produce, X amount of trips. We don't factor in that maybe households will grow, like you'll have 3 people per household today and 12, down the line. It's hard for us to make those kind of projections as in the CEQA analysis. So we do those analyses on a sort of project by project and a finite basis.
Okay.
Last question, sorry, one last question, pretty easy one, I think. So in 2006, the Board of Supervisors adopted the policy for mandatory lot merger 11 years ago, but it has not been executed to date. There's been a voluntary program in place, but when is the mandatory? I think I heard early 2018 that will be in place and effective?
I expect that by early 2018, we'll have the mandatory program in place. So we are planning to go back to the board with a proposal to update the dates in the resolution that was passed in 2006. So my understanding is not entirely clear, is that the board's adoption in 2006 was premised on sort of completion and near-term certification of an LCP, but that was not forthcoming. The LCP was negotiated and renegotiated for many years after, and then was finalized at the end of 2012, almost 5 years ago. So, that's probably would have been a good time to start the lot merger program, but here we are. We started Connect the Coast side at that time to look at the broader questions that we'll be talking about in a minute. And so we believe it's timely to initiate the lot merger program and on a voluntary basis this fall, and then early next year move into assuming the board agrees with the timelines they adopted in 2006, move into a mandatory program thereafter.
Thanks, Joe.
Absolutely.
Public comment.
First, thank you for coming out and going through the presentation for the
Absolutely,
public
happy to
tonight.
be here.
At first when I looked at the slides and I saw, Bayside Creek and then Coastal, my original question was, well, won't the creeks out here also have to follow the same policy? And then I thought I heard in your explanation, you mentioned that the creeks out here would follow that under the LCP. So I just want to make a slight recommendation, instead of calling it Bayside Creeks, maybe call it something else, because I can see 5 or 10 years from now when you're not around and there's a new set of people and they'll say, oh, no, that was only for the Bayside. So it should be, it's all creeks that
Right
you're
here
going to
in
have
the
these.
corridor.
That's a good suggestion. We'll
just-
make that change.
Just a little nit, because
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would be better to just
I think the ones
characterize.
Lisa found were much better, though. But the ones you found about the.
Oh, that, yeah. Catherine?
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Catherine Slater, Carter, Montera. This has been an interest of mine for decades. Living in Montera and having watched things happen there. First, I want to thank the MCC. Your comments are fabulous, and they're very educated, they're very thoughtful, and they certainly show an understanding of the history of the problems of development on the coast side. I think that while subdivision regulations maybe don't can't deal with parts of the site that's falling into the ocean or into a creek or down a cliff or wherever, it's certainly critical that the development regulations recognize that. When I first got started with this, there was a house in Miramar, and it was built, and half of the lot was already in the creek, and now 3/4 of it is in the creek, and the house is in danger, and so it's a public health and safety hazard. And those long-term issues shouldn't be ignored just to further development. We're talking about a community, not just an individual here. And I think that's very important, and I know the MCC knows that, but there are times when it doesn't appear to be as much of a concern for the county planners. Creeks are are not an appropriate designation. I think riparian area is much more accurate. I think it's important for riparian areas to also acknowledge that there are wetlands and that there are seasonal flows of water. I remember some time ago, being told that, well, that was just a seasonal flow of water, and so's the Mississippi River. We need to acknowledge that our subdivisions and our housing tracts are laid onto land and geographic conditions that pre-exist, and our subdivision maps were laid onto paper. And they didn't take into concern the slope. This appears to be starting to, but I think it needs more work. The other is, in looking at this, I see that you have referred to RM, but resource management is a zoning designation outside the coastal zone. And I have been told that RM regulations don't apply in the coastal zone because they're called Resource Management Coastal Zone here, RMCZ. And so the way this is written right now, it appears none of it applies over here. And if you're going to do it, I think you need to make sure that your nomenclature is very clear as to what applies here and what doesn't. So I'm curious about your mandatory mergers. I live in the RMCZ on 1 3/4 acres, where 5 acres is the zoning minimum. But when I built my house, it was not even suggested that I merge the 30 lots that underlie that 1 3/4 acres. Now, if I were to do what my neighbor did and put each of my 30 lots alternating in my children's, my husband's, and mine names, can I preserve those as individual lots? Just a question.
I think that's a really complicated question that I wouldn't be able to answer here tonight because it really depends on a lot of facts about your property that I don't have. And so I hesitate to make a determination about, on the fly, about what might or might not be legal or possible or permittable on your property. But I will say that I'll be talking a little bit about the mandatory merger, or the lot retirement program later, which does possibly affect RM properties, but at present, we're looking at the mandatory merger program focusing on residentially zoned parcels.
Only in the R1 then?
That's the current plan. Yeah.
I see, okay. And that was a very good answer. I applaud you for that. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time. And again, to the Midcoast Council, thank you very much. I can see you've put a lot of hard work in on this and knowledgeable work, and those of us who've been working on this in the meantime will support your efforts on this. And so thank you.
Does anybody else in the public wish to speak? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. What?
Hi, I'm Gail Erickson. I live in El Granada. And I have just two questions. First, as you mentioned, the erosion rate study, and I wonder who's doing that, or where are you getting the information on that?
Well, we didn't mention an erosion rate study, but we did make up erosion rates for that made-up parcel that we showed you. But I do know that Patrick Barnard from the USGS and a team of scientists are working on an update to the Cosmos model, which is under the auspices of Our Coast, Our Future, which is an effort by the Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, USGS, Point Blue, a environmental non-governmental organization, and some others in partnership to create decision-making tools that help planners, property owners, decision makers to make informed decisions about the impacts of sea level rise on natural and cultural resources. So part of the update that USGS is working on is a more refined approach to predicting erosion rates along the coast from San Mateo County down to San Luis Obispo area, sort of Central Coast. And that effort is underway, and we hope that they will have information for us in about a year's time that we can use in doing a vulnerability assessment for the South Coast from Half Moon Bay down to the border with Santa Cruz County and look at what some of the impacts might be. So right now, the coastal erosion studies are very coarse and not very reliable. So we're looking forward to having better tools soon.
One other question I have is my understanding also that Caltrans is doing an erosion rate study, and they have been doing it for a long time. Is there anyone coordinating with Caltrans about this? Because obviously their concern is Route 1.
Yeah.
And when they might need to move it or close it or do something to it.
So
I recommend, if you haven't, if nobody's contacted them, that they find out what they're doing.
Caltrans is aware of that because of the Coastal Commission's act requiring them to deal with that, so.
yeah, so
They know about
But I'm
the
trying to
effort.
get them to coordinate, that's all.
well,
They are coordinating.
yeah. I
They are?
mean,
Okay.
we worked with Caltrans on the Surfers Beach program to identify what kind of shoreline protection would work, and based on projected erosion rates for that site. But what I was trying to answer your question from the standpoint of a broader understanding, scientific understanding of how the coast works, which we don't have right now.
Mhm.
We don't really understand how the littoral cells along the coast and how the coastal drift actually works in terms of transporting sand between littoral cells and how the littoral cells function as independent units. So that's and that's the kind of work that Patrick Barnard is doing in his study that we think will give us a better ability to project long-term erosion rates on specific sites that we don't now have. Even though Caltrans and the Corps and others have done these projections, they don't really understand the sand dynamics along the coast in a way that makes those long-term projections credible.
The other question I have also has to do with our adjacent city, Half Moon Bay.
Yes.
Are you working with the city? Because a lot of the coastal area, that right now, I live in El Granada, and I look across Route 1, it's Half Moon Bay.
Mhm.
The city has a little arm going out there along Route 1. And I'm hoping that there's somebody that's also working with the city of Half Moon Bay, because the
Ab-
erosion.
absolutely.
The erosion is really bad right now.
Yeah.
within the
They're
city.
going through their whole general plan and LCD,
Uh-huh.
LUSP update, and then erosion is absolutely part of that.
It is.
And-
I've been
and we
in a number
will-
of the meetings.
Yeah, we will learn from their example, and they're also working with us on the sea change study of sea level rise vulnerability up and down the coast, and Half Moon Bay is an active partner in that study.
They are,
Yes, they are.
okay. Because I've been hearing things earlier tonight about Half Moon Bay not cooperating with some things, so I was hoping that they'd be cooperating with this, if
Great.
nothing else, because it really, the erosion there is really bad.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else in the public that wants to speak? Okay, seeing none, I'll close public comment. Back to the council. Chris?
Sorry, I have one question that I missed the first time, and then one concern or comment for Joe. So question, I know you're not here to go through the whole document, there's just a couple things jumped out at me when I was looking through. I just wanted to ask you, there's a section 7006, time limit for action against county judicial review. The whole section is deleted, and I'm wondering, was that moved to another, incorporated within another section, or has that text been removed from this update? And the gist of that is any action or proceeding to contest proceedings of county concerning a subdivision to determine legality, validity, blah, 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 must be commenced by a certain amount of time after the decision. The whole section is gone, so my question is, so now there's no opportunity for contesting this, or there's now no time limit? Because this whole section is gone now.
Yeah, I have to say that I am going to turn to David for an answer to that question.
Two-part answer. First part is the section you cited is proposed for deletion. And the basis for that deletion comes from our consultation with our county council, who has the view that there's more available under other state laws that address that point, and it would be better for us to not try to address it in our ordinance, and it then become a static entry, whereas the other state laws that pertain to it continue to evolve, and they offer more recourse than what our ordinance would contain at any point in time.
But that would be for the state law. This section right here specifically talks about proceedings of the county. I understand that there's a state law underpinning most of this, but it says proceedings of the county, and without this section, can there be proceedings against the county then? I mean, or...
That's what I'm referring to, is the recourse that somebody might want to avail themselves of in regard to a proceeding with the county that they took objection with. There's other state laws they could utilize for their recourse, rather than be unintentionally limited by what we might have in our provision in there.
And I'll say too that because we don't have a satisfactory answer this evening, we'll research it and try to provide a more reference to the other provisions of state law that give the public an opportunity to challenge, these types of matters. And it really was an effort to try and prevent, if you will, a limit, an apparent limit in the ordinance that might be more strict or more limiting to the public's ability to, or imply that there's a limit to the public's ability to challenge these decisions, than it was an effort to try and, just say, you can't challenge these at all. First of all, that's just not possible. I mean, state law makes provision for the public to challenge the county's decisions, and whether we have this provision or not, those are there. So we can just clarify for you kind of how those timelines may differ from what's in our ordinance.
I mean, thank you for that. I appreciate the answer. And, you know, maybe as you consider this in the future, maybe continue to have that section, but specify like actions that are better taken with the state as opposed to the county. Because without that section, I mean, you don't even know like, oh, I didn't even think of this, you know, that I've got this chance to appeal. Taking the whole thing out, it's, you know, you don't know that it's missing when it's not there. Whereas if the answer is seek other solutions, there's other solutions, maybe that's, because in other places you refer to, in this, as opposed to defining this whole term, you say, see the regulation in ordinance 2345. So something like that, that's a, you know, a cross-reference. See this, that you can go to this, as opposed to just taking it out and now it's out of sight, out of mind. Thank you for that. The other thing is in the section right before that, section 7005, there's again some text that struck out and some new text put in place. And I guess my concern here, this is with dealing with consideration of regional housing needs. So housing needs of the region as opposed to specifically the Midcoast. There's two words that have been deleted. So some word, help me, somebody, that have been taken out that concern me, and those two words are balance and residence. The text is, in carrying out the provisions of the subdivision regulations, the county shall consider the effective actions taken pursuant to these regulations on the housing needs of the region, and this is the original text, and balance these needs against the public service needs of residents and available fiscal environmental resources. So balance these needs against the public service needs of residents and available fiscal and environmental resources have been removed from this. And I see later has been added allocation of scarce resources such as potable water. But to me, the removal of the words balance and residence in conjunction with regional housing, that from being from the Midcoast, that gives me concern. When I see what's going on veterans and stuff in Redwood City, and then we have the words balance and residence stricken from this paragraph, I'm concerned that there's going to be, you know, that the needs and the balance that the Midcoast wants and the needs of its residents are going to now be far down the list with regard to what CCAG or whoever's determining these regional housing needs are setting. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to put that out there and get your thoughts on that. Those two words in particular, balance and residence.
Well, we spent a fair bit of time talking about this policy in our meetings because we felt it was unclear and that in some of us argued for taking it out altogether because as I mentioned several times tonight, we're not talking about development intensity policies here per se. I mean, we're trying to use the development footprint analysis sort of to get at that issue by front-loading consideration of these very kinds of constraints that you're reading about in this policy. In this subdivision process, to make sure that it's a transparent, process, that we don't create lots and then fight over the trees, when the building permit comes in. So, and on the one hand, it's a good policy because it's very general, and it says, look at things like natural resources and fiscal constraints and available potable water and sewer services and all those constraints that are real and affect the community nearby, and also think about the region and the need to accommodate housing. Now, the reality is that the accommodate housing part of that policy is set by the zoning. It's not set by the subdivision. So, the zoning that's in place on the coast side isn't changing as a result of this, and so the development potential is not changing as a result of these policies. It's really general plan and zoning that establishes those potentials. And we update the housing element every 8 years, go through a public process based on the regional housing needs allocation from the regional agencies and from the state and the regional agencies. And we do that in a very open manner with your input and feedback, and each time that's done, we make a new determination about where regional and local housing needs are going to be accommodated. And as I said, we're not making any changes to those. And I thank you for your feedback. I think we'll take another look at that policy and see if we can't make it clear, or maybe even thinking about taking it out.
I mean, I appreciate that, Joe, and I totally get that we're not changing policy here, but I wanted to alert you to it as you go back and consider this, that especially on the Midcoast, where we've got some projects coming down the line that are, regional housing projects, taking out the words balance and residence, those are two words that go right to the bone of how people are feeling some people are feeling right now on the Midcoast. And so I guess the issue for me is less that whether we're going to change the ordinance and the density. To me, it's that of all the words to take out, balance and residence seem like two words that couldn't you just have left them in? Because by taking them out, you're saying something.
Yeah, we're trying to, I think, if I can characterize it, David helped me out here too. I think the idea was to try to get it out of the idea that we were making zoning decisions, in the subdivision process. But maybe we didn't do as good a job as we might have.
I get that, with this conversation, okay, got it, understand that, but somebody else reading this in two dimensions would be like, wait a minute, are we not gonna have balance for the residents?
Yeah,
So that's what I just
we'll
wanted to
take
point out.
another
Thank you,
look
Joe.
at that. Thank you for your feedback.
Yeah, I agree with Chris's concerns.
Could I dive into certificates of compliance?
Yeah, you absolutely can.
We had a project at the Princeton Boatyard some years back, and it's in limbo. They spring at us again at any moment. But anyway, situation there was, let me start here. We had, as you know, the Midcoast subdivided 100 years ago. We got these lots, 25 by 100. And they're substandard. And in Princeton, the boatyard, as spoke of, it had 6 of these, 25 by 100, along the shoreline, and 2 others on the inland side. But it was all owned by one person who wanted to develop it. And this was right when Whit and Abernathy started to get in the mix and whatever, and because he wanted to build separate things on each parcel, even though he owned the whole thing. And so once this situation was pointed out, the property owner changed the ownership, made these LLCs, 2 different LLCs, and then put each one alternating ownership, so that he thought, I guess, it couldn't be merged. Well, we haven't found out, because the project languished on appeal and now been sold, and I don't know what the new owner's going to do. But anyway, whatever. So this came to my attention about Whit and Abernathy, and then we had these certificates of compliance. I thought, well, this is great. This is going to fix this situation. But and then more recently, I've become interested because as development increases, and I realize that looking at the COC applications, you're going to see what's going to come next as a development application. And so I've been following them, and what I see is that they are, well, okay, forgive me while I jump around. So I get that we have type A if the project was sold separately before 1945, and type B was sold separately after 1945. And type A, you get your certificate. Type B, you got to get a CDP. It's appealable to the Coastal Commission. You got to have a hearing, and yet I have never seen any of them denied or appealed or had any kind of meaningful conditions attached to it. It seemed like a lot of paperwork, all this research, for nothing, because at our end of it, where we're looking to hopefully get some substandard parcels merged or, reduce build out, we weren't getting anything from this process, and clearly the applicants had a lot of work, and I couldn't understand it. And, so let me see if so I think reading carefully through this new version that you have in here, I have a little bit of understanding. So now, am I correct that when you say conditional, so the type B is a conditional certificate of compliance, I thought that meant like sometime later you might yank it away from them, but apparently that means conditions are attached to it. That's what
Yeah,
that
so
means.
if I can try, and it is a very sort of confusing hybrid sort of transaction with governmental entities. So any certificate of compliance is a ministerial act, or at least part of it is. So in other words, if a parcel is found to be legal, whether it's a type A or a type B, the certificate part of it is ministerial. The distinction between types A's and type B's is not whether it's conditional whether you get it or not,
Right.
because which the word maybe implies that it's not. So the whether you get it or not part is ministerial. It's what's conditional or discretionary are the conditions that are attached. And so if the two sort of prongs of that are that if the property was post 1945, and the property owner but it's been separately sold, then the conditions would be based on the general plan and zoning then in effect when the property owner when it was conveyed separately. If the property owner that owned it, or basically it's the policies then in effect when the property owner acquired it, and so but if that same property owner bought it and still holds it today, then the current policies can be applied. So where the condition comes in is which kinds of conditions can be applied: historic general plan and zoning or current general plan and zoning, and those are based on when the property was acquired or sold. And then so if you're looking to buy a piece of property that you're just now making the transaction, you're looking at historic zoning and general plan policies for those kinds of conditions. But so that's where the discretion comes in. It's ministerial whether you qualify or not, whether it's a legal parcel. And then the conditions are only to bring it into compliance with general plan and zoning. So if it needs a street or a sidewalk or some other kind of public improvement in order to be compliant, then you can impose those kinds of conditions. Well, generally speaking, the kind of lots that you've been seeing front on streets. They're not looking to put in sewers and storm drains and all those kinds of things. So like the example you shared of Princeton, those were lots that fronted on a street.
No.
One of them fronted on in the Water Street, Ocean
Ocean
Avenue.
Boulevard.
Yeah, and this gets back to the problem of paper subdivisions, and then that subdivision in Princeton was done in 1908 at a time when the beach was platted as a street. Well, that part of the beach is gone now, and there's a scarp there, so still platted as a street, but not something that's possible. So generally speaking, those we deal with those merger questions when somebody comes in for development, but we don't do those proactively.
Oh, right, well, we thought development was imminent, but like I say, this is, it's still to come, the decision on those parcels.
And I'm gonna ask David just to rescue me here a little bit on the triggers for the difference between a type A that has, or sorry, a conditional that has compliance under, prior zoning versus the present day zoning, there's a trigger there that, I don't know if you recall what it is, I mean, we could. I
And
don't
maybe you
have-
could
I don't
come up to the podium and speak so the
have-
video will pick it
have the
up.
language in front of me, but,
Could I just add the tail end of my question on
oh, yeah,
before?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
thought you were done.
So, sorry, it was long and wandering. I'm going to get to the point. There's another recent COC type B that I was watching, and I don't, well, okay. It's Miramar, 10,000 square foot minimum parcel size. This is a parcel that's 4,400 square feet, doesn't even meet the 5,000 square foot minimum. And it got the COC type B. It was first sold into separate ownership in 2008, so it falls within this. It got the COC type B, and I read the conditions carefully just this afternoon, and it says it's all good. And because you're allowed, the county allows a use permit to develop on substandard parcels. So you're good to go. So like I say, and then the LCP policies, they just explain them all away. And so it just seemed, like I say, once again, get back to, it's hopeless that they'll all be approved and whatever. So then I get to what I read in your, this is new bolded wording in here. And maybe I'm reading this wrong, but this sounded hopeful. This is on page 11.14. For substandard size parcels, where a chain of title shows that the first separate conveyance of such a parcel would not have been allowed under the zoning district's current minimum lot size requirements, a certificate of compliance type B, if issued, shall include a condition requiring said parcel to be merged with its parent parcel if under common ownership, or alternatively, a condition prohibiting new development on said parcel. So now, I guess what I would ask, does that really mean what it sounds like? And that's different than what they're currently doing.
Yeah, well, I think, part of the question is, so let me just take a quick look at that language again. Two or more joint change titles have never been separately conveyed. Are you talking about subparagraph D?
Page 11.14, and it's number 1, and it's in bold.
Oh, okay. Substandard parcel where chain of title shows that the first separate conveyance of such parcel would not have been allowed. Well, that is, yeah, I have to say that in reading this now, I think it does, appear to convey a, oh, but it's in the LCP. Chain title 7, currently 35. Require a coastal development permit for substandard. I think what this is supposed to mean, or, I think that this is supposed to say, is that would not have been allowed under the zoning district's minimum lot size requirements then in effect, as opposed to today's standards, because to take away, if somebody bought something that was identified as a legal parcel at some point, then, and let's say that's one of these old subdivisions that were approved by the county, and then those were subsequently conveyed separately. It's not in the, I don't know that the county's in a safe position to say to somebody, if you own this lot separately, you don't own the lot next door. Your neighbor's built a house on that lot, and now we're telling this person, either you merge this with that lot, or you can't build on it. That has not been our practice, and it's because if you don't, because it'd be, I think somebody could have successful takings
Well, so
claim under
you
that.
mean you're gonna change this wording?
I believe so.
I
Yeah.
thought it
I mean,
might
do
be
you
too
agree
good to
with
be
that?
true. Like I say, this parcel in Miramar it said right in the staff report, 2 times, that it was first sold separately in 2008. Now, the current zoning there, the minimum parcel size of 10,000 happened in 1980. And even the 5,000, sure, was probably the previous one, even that, this is 4,400 square feet. And they said, good to go, they'll get their use permit, because the county has a whole section there where, for development of substandard parcels.
Right.
And you just give them a use permit and they're good to go. So, like I say, then I read this policy and I thought, oh, wow, maybe they're gonna put a stop to this.
I mean, we do have a policy that requires people to attempt to merge and/or purchase
Yes.
additional property, but, you know, it's very difficult because land's so expensive.
Well, this is exactly, let me try and reiterate, I think, the original issue that Lisa raised. So the Princeton case, so say that 2 years ago, this guy took these 6 lots under one ownership, split them up so they were alternating. So now they're under 2 different ownerships, fictitious or not, doesn't matter. It seems like they should not be able to get COC type Bs on those parcels because they were sold separately after all these conditions were in place.
It wasn't arm's length. New term I learned.
Right, so arm's length is
Yeah.
defined up front, and it's definitely not an arm's length thing.
Yeah, and that, but that's a necessity, you know, and that's something that's ferreted out in the course of doing a COC analysis.
Well, that's really the question. So if that's determined when somebody on any of those 6 lots decides they want to build on any of those 6 lots, what we're hoping for on the coast is that lot cannot get a type B.
Well, as you point out, you know, there's a number of policies that come into play, and one of
Yeah.
them is that there has to be an arm's length transaction in order to.
Right. Well, clearly in this case, there was not.
And if that's not present, I don't know the facts of this case, but it is.
Right, well, let's keep it hypothetical. So say it's as I described it.
Then we would look into that and find that it was not an arm's length transaction. We wouldn't see those as separate ownership.
And so theoretically, it would not get a type B certificate.
Theoretically.
Okay.
And basically, what I was thinking this said, that the type B for the substandard parcel could get a condition prohibiting new development. That's not gonna happen, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, this is language that we spent quite a bit of time developing, so let me just say that I think that it raises some questions with us as to whether or not we can prohibit development on parcels that were legally sold separate and pursuant to, you know, that lots that were shown on a historic subdivision map, and they're in separate ownership. I believe those types of lots can get a type B.
All right, so just leave it at that. We're very interested in this topic, and we'd like to
Extremely.
follow up and find some clarification on that
We will.
paragraph and all that. So
And
just, we can
this
leave
is
it there.
something we'll probably have a whole section on at the workshop before the planning commission.
Okay.
Because it's one, you know, obviously, we made pretty substantial changes to the language in the ordinance, and we want to make sure that we got it right, and we want to make sure that you and we understand it. So we will be spending considerable amount of time on this.
And for us, just to beat this dead horse all the way into the ground. So say that instead, you know, one of the lots is legal size and the other one they sold is not legal size. Then when the one that's legal size asks for its type B, we would like to see some condition that says, hey, the deed transfer on the other lot has to say it can't be built, which is the language that Lisa was hoping was saying exactly that. So I wanted to make really clear that that's what most of us on the mid-coast, other than some developers, would really like to see be the case.
Okay.
So just to really be super clear about what we're hoping for.
Okay, thanks. Anybody
Thank
else
you.
have comments or questions on this? Oh, good, we're done with this one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're not done with you.
Oh, no, I know, yeah. Can't
So
get rid of me that easy.
The next item is a progress update for the Cypress Roundabout and connect the coast side.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Again, Joe Leclerc, Planning Manager with the county. So I'll start with the Connect the Coast side, of which the roundabout is a part. It's also related to a development project called Big Wave, but it's sort of, it's also part of our overall approach to improving transportation infrastructure on the coast side. So the local coastal program that the county administers includes a policy that calls for the preparation of a comprehensive transportation management plan on the coast side that assesses the impacts of build-out of the county's general plan on the transportation infrastructure on the coast side, and then identifies strategies for addressing any shortcomings with regard to transportation mobility, in part to address coastal access. A concern is that the public may not have access to the coast side because there's too much traffic. And so that process started a couple of years ago. We've got some consultants under contract helping us prepare this plan. And we're at the point where there are a number of, and it includes not only transportation improvements, but it also includes land use strategies. So we've talked a bit about the lot merger program. It also includes a proposal for lot retirement, which would look at a way of requiring lot retirement as part of development. And so I have to say I'm not familiar with the particulars of the lot retirement program at this point. However, it has been presented to the public at prior workshops and will be part of the plan going forward. And our intention is to have a draft of the plan, both the transportation improvements and the land use components, ready late fall, early winter, and that we'll be conducting public workshops with including publishing of an environmental document that people will be able to comment on, and then moving that forward into planning commission and board consideration in the late this year, early next year. So that's the time frame for moving Connect the Coast Side forward. And part of the Connect the Coast Side effort is looking at control at the intersection of Cypress and Avenue and Highway 1. So when the consultants first presented their ideas that was about a year ago, I guess, at a public meeting, they were promoting a signal as a solution at that intersection. It was also a mitigation measure that the Big Wave group included in their development proposal and mitigations. But in the course of reviewing the EIR towards the end of the approval process on that project, a roundabout was required also to be studied. Since then, the Caltrans has adopted a requirement that any intersection that meets signal warrants has to go through what's called the intersection control evaluation to look at whether a roundabout will work in lieu of a signal at those intersections. So we're following that process, and to develop the roundabout design or conceptual design for this intersection, we expanded our consultant DKS's contract and asked them to do a conceptual design and analysis of the throughput of a roundabout at this intersection. So as part of that, we had a charrette on August 2nd here in Half Moon Bay at the Senior Center. We were lucky to have Dave Olson attend, along with a consultant that the Midcoast Council hired by the name of Michael Wallwork, who's a world-renowned expert in roundabouts. And we reviewed the traffic analysis accounts that DKS prepared in June, and their conclusion is that the intersection currently meets a signal warrant, and that the under current conditions, and that based on those traffic volumes, they believe that a one-lane roundabout would work at that location. The problem is that we know that the traffic volumes are going to increase, both because there's going to be additional development on lots that people own, and based on the general plan and zoning now in effect, and that the Big Wave project is going to add traffic to that intersection. And so we believe that over time that a two-lane roundabout is going to be necessary, although we're not entirely sure about configuration and whether a full two-lane roundabout is necessary. There may be a possibility for a hybrid that, you know, has partial two-lane roundabout, but I think that the positive thing about the charrette was that we looked at a host of design considerations that need to be factored into the conceptual design, and Mr. Wallwork was really helpful in ensuring that our consultants were looking at a broad range of design considerations in developing the conceptual design. So we were not looking at specific design proposals at the workshop. We were confirming what the design considerations should be for the alternatives that DKS is going to develop. And I don't know, Dave, you can tell me, but my impression was that there was a lot of agreement between DKS and Mr. Wallwork with regard to what those design possibilities are and should be, and what types of configurations should be studied.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement, and I think, unfortunately, Caltrans team didn't make it to the charrette, but Supervisor Horsley did meet with Director Bijan, who's the director of Caltrans District 4, the entire Bay Area, and Mr. Bijan was definitely. Is that his first name or his last name?
That's his first name.
Sorry.
Bijan.
Sorry, Bijan, sorry. Bijan did think that a roundabout would be appropriate there, and that's not any kind of commitment, not funding or anything else, but, so it sounds like everybody is in agreement that roundabout is probably the right answer there. Then there was a site visit, and there was a lot of discussion about different possibilities. So yeah, I think it was a very productive meeting.
I mean, one thing that was thrown out, very rough numbers, but it was like 135, you know, $1 million for a signal, 3 million for a single lane roundabout, and 5 million for a double lane roundabout. So it's an expensive undertaking, and you know, a project like that will have to compete with other transportation projects for funding in the region. So and those are very rough numbers, and we'll be refining those in the course of preparing the study, and we'll share those with you at public meetings as soon as we have more detailed information. But we expect that the consultants are going to move fairly quickly towards having a range of design alternatives that we can talk about, because we want to resolve this as part of Connect the Coast site.
Yeah, and I will clarify, those were very, very preliminary construction costs, and did not include the lifetime analysis cost, which was discussed quite a bit during the meeting. Lifetime costs of signals tend to be significantly higher than lifetime cost of roundabouts. The other thing it did not consider was long-term safety benefits. When Caltrans does these things, they have a measure of accidents and potential cost of accidents, the costs of injuries and all of that, and they all factor into the cost-benefit trade-off. So the construction costs are not the whole story, and as Joe said, those will be factored into the longer term. The two-lane roundabout also would require some land acquisition, which is part of what drove the cost up significantly. There was also a lot of discussion about, if we believe a two-lane roundabout may ultimately be required, but is not required by current traffic, that it's much better to acquire the land and design for the two-lane, but implement only the one-lane initially. So that can sort of reduce costs while still keeping things manageable.
I think that that's all that we had at this point on both of those, so if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them or take your comments.
Questions from the council? Brandon?
So how would a hybrid two-lane roundabout look like? Is it just one lane with the capacity to open up another lane immediately?
Well, actually, that was the proposal that we discussed at the meeting, was that we would build a two-lane roundabout initially if it was deemed that that was the appropriate configuration, close off the second lane, and then open it when traffic demanded that it be open. But the idea being that you would acquire right-of-way all at once and only mobilize for construction once, because those are very expensive costs, and they just, if you have to do it twice, it really drives up the overall cost of the project. Now, I am not familiar with hybrid. It was a design that was mentioned at the workshop. I haven't seen one, but my understanding is that sometimes you can have a double lane, like on two parts of it, where the turning movements to the side street are frequent at, say, peak hour, but you don't need those two lanes on the exit, so you may be able to create these slip lanes on two edges of the roundabout. So I think that's what a sort of hybrid two-lane roundabout is. But all those configurations are going to be studied by our consultants against the parameters that Caltrans will require. So some of the metrics that drive what's possible are what Caltrans will allow. And so in the way of gap acceptance factors, which is how close cars will drive into a roundabout, and that affects the throughput. And so there's a lot of differing points of view about what those appropriate gap acceptance factors are.
And I also have another question. You said that a two-lane would require land acquisition, correct?
I didn't say that,
Oh,
Mr.
I
Olson
did.
did, but I agree with him.
Who would be owning land, and would it require eminent domain?
Well, it depends. First of all, I would imagine that the property would be acquired on behalf of Caltrans. So the county would probably acquire the land and then deed it to Caltrans, because it would become part of the highway right-of-way. So, and you know, one of the things that we didn't mention was that we were looking at ways to accommodate pedestrians and bicycles as part of this, to make sure that there's pedestrian safety and bicycle safety. And we talked about a number of ideas for ways for that to be configured. So they're going to study different ways to configure those, because there are different approaches that have different safety implications. But as far as your point on property ownership, it would most likely be acquired on behalf of Caltrans, and whether or not eminent domain would be necessary is really a function of how important if it's deemed that you don't have a willing seller and the project is of vital importance to the county, then that's another decision that the county board of supervisors would have to make, that they would want to exercise. They have that power. Whether they want to exercise it in this circumstance is uncertain. First of all, we don't even know that we have a willing seller, so it's inappropriate to estimate that would be what would happen at this point.
Yeah, nobody knows exactly how much land would be required, but it's probably part of a lot on the southeast corner and part of a lot on the northwest corner.
Even though it's a two-lane roundabout isn't even required in the first place.
If the decision is acquire land and design for two-lane for the future, which is not a foregone conclusion, then yes, that would probably happen. And the county historically has tried very hard to reach an agreement with the property owner before resorting to eminent domain. And Nicholas Calderon, the former legislative aide of Don Horsley, is in the county manager's office now. He's heading up the county real estate operations. He was at the meeting, and that was the main reason he was at the meeting, because of potential land acquisition.
Oh, mention about the Etheldor bypass aiding construction.
Oh, so one of the other things that got discussed, we're getting sort of off of Connect Coast side, but the very apropos of the roundabout, is when you construct a roundabout on an existing highway, there's two primary ways to do it. One is you close the highway and do the construction and give traffic some way around it. You get it done relatively quickly, relatively cheaply. The other way is you construct it while the traffic is there with partial lane closures and flagmen and everything else. So Etheldor is the old Highway 1 route, and so it would be possible, not saying it's going to happen, to route traffic on Etheldor for a relatively short period of time. Michael Wallwork said they've done this in a month, on an active highway in New York. So it's much cheaper and faster to get it done that way, but it's obviously very disruptive to the residents on the bypass street. So there's a lot of trade-offs there. But it's a potential way to get things done a lot faster.
I'd just like to say thanks and congratulations to everybody who is part of this. It's very encouraging.
Thank you.
Okay, I have two speaker slips. Marcia Yates.
Good evening and thank you. And thanks for all the hard work on all this traffic stuff. It's really a tough subject to approach. I represent Resist Density, and we support the roundabout at Cypress and Highway 1. Traffic lights create more gridlock. Just look at Princeton Harbor and at Capistrano. And Palo Alto and Stanford University are replacing tons of their stop signs with roundabout. Why? It keeps the increased neighborhood and campus traffic flowing, and that's our take on it. And I believe that the council is working with the same architect, the same traffic guy did the roundabouts that are doing it at Stanford and Palo Alto, so I think that's totally awesome. But I also have to ask a question about the county and their future predictions, because I find that, I find that to Connect the Coast really didn't take, they took some of the public suggestions, but they came back a couple of times like we didn't even show up and give them any input. So also I think that if we think that the highway is going to need a 2-lane roundabout in the end decision, but because of money, only put in a 1-lane. I think, lots of times they do things very short-sightedly because of money. And I think if we need to, we should spend the most money up front and get the most efficient thing out of it. And if we're going to close off the freeway to make it faster and less expensive, let's make it big. Because if we make it small and have to do it again, everybody's going to want to shoot you guys. So anyway, thank you.
Catherine?
Thank you, Catherine Slater-Carter from Montero. At the last MWSD meeting, almost a week ago, when I was announcing what was on the MCC agenda, I did mention the roundabouts, and the individual members sitting on the MWSD board all approved of the roundabout. We've all had experience with them, and not only that, but with the new design of roundabouts, and we think it's a much better solution than a stoplight. I would suggest if you're going to put traffic on Etheldor, you include the cost of repaving it with the developer, so that the citizens don't suffer from a potholed street during and afterwards. It should be repaved ahead of time. That said, I am sorry I missed the charrette I have been paying attention to this for a long time and attended a lot of the Connect the Coast meetings. I have been driving on roundabouts in Kings Beach and Truckee for a long time. Kings Beach just put them in, and there is much, much more traffic on the Kings Beach roundabouts than I have seen for the most part here, and they're single lane. They had to do some remodeling of them after they were first put in so people could get across the street and have access and so on. But they have generally been been successful and fewer accidents because the cars are always moving, so there's not so many rear ends, and there's a very active commercial side on each side of the street, and people are constantly trying to get back and forth. So the roundabouts have been very beneficial to the business community as well as the visitor community. So I would hope that we would see this as a standard for the Midcoast. I realize space is somewhat of a problem, but I think when you're talking about you're modified, it reminds me of the tunnel, which was supposed to be a one lane, but we know a little restriping and it's a 2-lane. And I am concerned that this is a design with some subterfuge to change us to a 2-lane community and make us look more like the El Camino of the coast, and I think that is not so good. So I would recommend 1 lane and just sort of keep it at that. People can cope. A lot of us cope with the 1 lane on Highway 92 coming back every day, and it's not so bad. Just make sure there's radio signal so people can listen to the radio at the same time. Thanks.
Anybody else from the public wish to speak? Gail?
I just have a question. This is about the charrette that you said was on August 2nd.
Yes.
Was that recorded? Is there any way people can get information on that?
No, it wasn't a public meeting.
It wasn't?
No.
Okay.
It was a technical meeting between ourselves, our consultants, and the Midcoast Community Council's consultants. And we had invited Caltrans to participate, but they were unable to.
They were unable.
And so they didn't come.
Do you plan any public meetings on something like this, or?
Sure, we do. There, as I mentioned, they're going to be, we'll be sharing the results of this work with the community as part of the Connect the Coast side rollout. And so there'll be plenty of opportunity for public feedback about the alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we actually intend to conduct a separate public meeting on the roundabout so that it's not nested in the larger Connect the Coast side effort, because we understand that the community has a lot of interest in being able to provide feedback on the alternatives.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Anybody else on the council have anything to say on this? Dan?
Yeah, I wanted to say, since we're talking about the overall purpose of Connect the Coast side, safety, flow, mobility. Can I get you to agree with me right now, please, that if there were an under-road passage for pedestrians, that it would, under Highway 1, and wherever it might be, that this, by not having the pedestrians stop the traffic, this would increase, this would help mobility?
Well, certainly, anytime you have unimpeded flow, doesn't matter what it is, bikes, peds, cars, you have more throughput. And so I agree that under crossings or over crossings can be, depending on the circumstances, really improvements to flow. Now, I know from my experience that there are always challenges with undercrossings too. You have to, if you're lucky and you're in the right place where drainage works really well, and the undercrossing isn't subject to flooding or, then that's maybe one of the challenges you can sidestep, but also, there are safety considerations. Some people don't feel safe in undercrossings, and so consequently won't use them. And I've seen lots of undercrossings go unused. So, for that reason, or I shouldn't say unused, but low use. So, while undercrossings can be a great strategy, it really depends on the site, the conditions, and the user population, you know, as to how well they work. But they, in the right circumstances, they can work really well.
Yeah, I'll note that they are working very well in many parts of California.
Absolutely.
And across the country.
And I can point to a number of
Worldwide.
them that don't work well, too. So-
Yeah, usually they're the ones that are not used. There's not really a need for them, and for reasons I can't explain, I guess you know, they're just not. They're not managed. They're ignored, and so they're left. But there's a lot of them where they're needed are working very well, and I believe that there are certainly engineering solutions for any of the problems that challenges that you mentioned. I mean, there are answers. Caltrans built a bridge with one cable, so if they can do that, they can pretty much do anything that they choose to put their mind on. So we're agreeing that it would certainly not impede the flow, help the mobility of the cars, and it would also obviously help the mobility of the pedestrians, not having to wait for a break in traffic to safely cross the road. Cross it any time they want. I think it's a good solution, and I'm going to continue to advocate for it.
Very good. Thank you. I think I've shared all I have to say about that.
Is that it? Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris?
I just want to do a little bit of back clapping here. I want to thank Len and Gail Erickson, Dave and Lisa, the Ericksons for finding Michael Walworth, Dave and Lisa for pursuing this. I mean, really, the roundabouts, in my opinion, are the right solution for Moss Beach. There's been definitely some resistance, some initial reluctance on the part of Caltrans and other organizations it seemed likes to go forward with this, but last year the MCC allocated some money from its own budget. This year I think we increased that amount, the original amount, and we used that money. And what I heard Dave say at the charrette, that money has already paid dividends because that consultant that the Ericksons located for us and that we allocated money for contributed to good discussions with DKS and it helped inform DKS so that going forward, I think we'll have a better, when we see design examples and we start to move forward with this, I think it'll be more targeted, more appropriate for the Midcoast. And so I just want to, as a member of this body, congratulate this body for having the vision to come up with that idea, to listen to the members of the community, and to pursue it. Again, putting our money where our mouths are. And I'm very proud of the MCC for taking this, hiring this consultant, introducing them to the appropriate people, and having Dave and Lisa continue to press forward on this issue, because it sounds like we're going to get the best solution. And I'm not sure that would have happened without these people that I mentioned. So I just want to congratulate the MCC on working hard for the community.
Anybody else? Brandon?
So I do support this project, but, you know, I think that what I don't support is eminent domain to be used very often. And I hope we could, you know, go for a good settlement, whether it's a 1-lane, 2-lane, or hybrid. And also, I hope that this project will go smoothly. I do think that Caltrans, with its history of delays and over budgeting. Usually projects that are budgeted, finish like 5 times the cost, such as the Bay Bridge. I do hope that they do a better job on this project.
Anybody else? Well, I've got something to say. Supervisor Horsley's not here, but I just want to give him a shout out. I mean, basically, Dave and I met, and Lenny Roberts met with Supervisor Horsley April or something in 2016, and lobbied for this roundabout, and he said he would support it, and he has carried through on that promise. And thank you, Don Horsley. So,
Yeah, and I should mention, he was at the charrette along with
Don
Ellie.
did attend the charrette along with Ellie, so, and went on the site visit with us, and wore an orange vest.
yeah, if it wasn't for him, this wouldn't be happening now, I'm pretty sure. So is that it on that item?
It is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys,
Thank you.
for all this.
Absolutely.
Dave,
And,
thank you very
I
much.
think we're
Joe,
gonna-
thank you.
Absolutely, and we'll look forward to your participation in the workshop, and please send us any comments that you might have along the way as you review it. So, this is sort of the, the initial rollout and public comment period that's gonna last for a couple of months, so we really do want to get your feedback. And we'll get back to you on some of the questions that we didn't answer that well tonight as well.
I get the feeling that we probably won't be sending you a letter like we did the first time, summing it up, because there was really only a few points, and then we've agreed that will be some further exchange.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
fine.
so,
But as you work through it, if there are questions or comments that you have,
all right,
you can do it through email or any way that works for you.
all right.
Are any of the first meetings scheduled? The next-
Um,
are you-
At present, I can't tell you what the first meeting date in October for the planning commission is off the top of my head, but it's the second Wednesday. So, second Wednesday in October is our current plan for holding the public workshop for the planning commission.
That would be the 13th,
The 13th of October.
or
Yep.
14th. So they meet the same day we do.
Yes. So that's our plan at this point, is to have that public workshop before the planning commission on the 13th of October. Thank you very much for all of your help getting ready for tonight,
All right.
and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, have a good night.
Thank you,
Enjoy the rest
Joe.
of your meeting.
So the next item is council activity. Does anyone have anything to report?
One more minor detail from the charrette, we did get our invoice from Michael Walwork, our consultant. It came in a little bit higher than our approved amount, just under 5% higher. So I don't think we need anything special on that. That's sort of within the normal contingency range.
We're still under the original 5,000 we allotted for this.
Yes.
So,
But for those who are interested, the total cost was $4,324.06.
anything else?
That's it for me.
Future agendas. I have for August 23rd, County Parks presentation on the Ohlone Portola Heritage Trail, and possibly an update on Fitzgerald Marine Reserve Master Plan Assessment and Progress Report. That's not confirmed yet. And also at that meeting, Arbor Lane, new bluff top house coastal hazard issues. This is not design review, just coastal hazards. And September 13th, following meeting is the San Francisco Airport aircraft noise presentation. We'll have a presentation by the Noise Abatement Office and Dave Pine. And then, this is not an MCC meeting, but I just wanted to let you know, coming up, the Mid-Penn Housing, Affordable Housing project, the pre-application workshop is going to be in September. They have not, I think they're having trouble finding a venue, but they're trying to have it on September 3rd, but this is not confirmed yet. I don't think they have a venue arranged, and we will have that posted on our website. The plans for the project are posted there. Anybody have anything to add to future agendas?
Did you say you're trying to have it on September 3rd, a Sunday?
12,
Oh, okay, 12.
sorry. I don't have a head for numbers. So we're ready to adjourn? Oh, we are adjourned. Thank you.
So for the meeting on Sunday, I'll try to take in what we get, just refine the list a little, and see, and with new ideas. And we'll work.